The radio went silent at 0641 on the ridge. 12 soldiers held their breath, while 3 men set a mortar tube in the valley below. A threat buried in their own reports, classified as general elevated activity, filed and forgotten. She had known it was there. For 9 evenings she had gone to the range alone, shooting past the limits the manual said were real, until 840 meters felt like something her hands already knew. The commander below stood with his arms crossed, relaxed, believing doctrine made him untouchable. That lift asked for guidance would not arrive in time. Her eyes stayed locked in the scope. One slow exhale. The space between heartbeats, and the shot that should never have been possible left the barrel. 42 days before everything changed. A lieutenant in a briefing room at Fort Bragg asked 5 words that should not have required an answer. Who gave her that rifle? Said in the tone someone uses to ask who left the back door open. Practical, mildly inconvenienced. Entirely confident in the reasonableness of the question, which was the most dangerous thing about it. 42 days later, that woman fired 1 bullet across 1,840 meters of open Afghan sky and brought every single person in that room home alive. This is her name. This is her story. And this is why it almost didn't make it into the record. Fort Bragg. August 2009. The air smelled like red clay and diesel fuel, and the particular kind of heat that doesn't apologize for itself. The kind that settles into concrete and stays there, that makes the buildings feel heavier than their foundations, and the air feel thicker than it has any right to be. The kind of heat that makes everything feel slightly more permanent than it is. Like the temperature itself has decided, this is how things are now, and adjusting to any other reality is someone else's problem. Nora Callahan was already sitting at the administrative desk when the officer walked in. 3rd chair from the left, spine straight, eyes down. Reading a topographical map the way other people read novels, completely, unhurriedly, like the answer to something important was buried, port, somewhere in the contour lines, and she intended to find it before anything interrupted her. The officer looked at the transfer request on his desk. Looked at her, looked back at the transfer request. The form had not changed its mind. You sure about this? She didn't look up. Intelligence to designated marksman is a significant. I know what it is. Still not looking up, I'm just saying. Most people in your position would. She finally looked up. Met his eyes. Held them for exactly as long as necessary. Not longer. Not shorter. The specific duration of a look that communicates everything it needs to without adding anything extra. Then she picked up the pen, signed the transfer request, and slid it across the desk toward him, with the flat efficiency of someone completing a transaction that should have been completed long ago. Didn't say another word, just stood. Picked up her bag, walked out. The officer sat there holding the signed form for a moment, staring at the empty doorway, blinking in the way people blink when they have been in a conversation that ended before they expected it to. Because here is the thing about Nora Callahan. She never argued, never explained, never auditioned for anyone's approval, or stayed in a room long enough for someone to talk her out of something she had already decided. She had learned long ago that arguing with certain kinds of resistance was like trying to have a conversation with weather. It didn't respond to logic. It didn't respond to evidence. It just continued, indifferent to whatever you brought to it, so she moved instead. Clean and quiet and completely certain. Like a bullet that has already left the barrel and doesn't particularly care what you think about physics. The bullet is not asking for your opinion. The bullet has already done the math. She was 29 years old. She had been in the Army for 11 years. She had filed this exact transfer request twice before. Once at 23, when she was young enough to still be surprised by the rejection. Once at 26, when she was experienced enough to have expected it and had applied anyway, because the act of asking was also a form of record-keeping, and records mattered to her in a deep and fundamental way that she had understood since childhood. Both times, denied. Both times. The word that appeared in the rejection documentation was inappropriate, which is a very careful word, a professional word. The kind of word that means everything and proves nothing, and cannot be appealed on any grounds that anyone in the document wants to officially acknowledge. The first rejection, she filed an appeal. Documented. Methodical. 8 pages with citations. Denied again. The second rejection, she did not file an appeal. She spent the following 6 months building a 14-page analysis instead. Tactical effectiveness data from mixed-role units operating in mountain terrain. Long-range marksmanship, outcomes by engagement type. Casualty differentials between operations with and without embedded precision fire support. Detailed breakdowns of specific scenarios in which a designated marksman embedded with a patrol unit had provided decisive, outcome-changing capability that a non-embedded marksman could not have provided. Every number sourced, every conclusion defensible, every sentence written in the flat, evidential language of someone who has decided that emotion will not be the argument. Because motion can be dismissed, and numbers cannot. She walked it directly to the battalion commander's office. No appointment, no cover letter, no explanation of what she was bringing or why. She knocked on the door, entered when told to, handed it over. He read all 14 pages while she stood across the desk from him. He looked up. "Approved," he said. That was the whole meeting. Her mother did not celebrate when Nora called with the news. Rest her Sergeant Nora Callahan. Retired, 22 years in Army intelligence. Received the information the way she received most information, with complete attention, without visible reaction, and with the particular economy of a person who has spent decades in a profession where reacting visibly to things is a form of vulnerability she could not afford. She listened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Now it starts getting hard." Nora had expected something warmer, something closer to congratulations, or "I always knew you would," or any of the phrases that parents say when a child achieves something they have been working toward for years. The phrases that acknowledge the effort and celebrate the result and let everyone exhale for a moment before the next thing begins. She thought about it later. On the drive back to the barracks, the particular silence of a car moving through a base at night when everything is lit just enough to see by and not quite enough to see clearly, when the shapes of things are familiar and the specifics are blurred. Now it starts getting hard. Not "you finally did it." Not "I'm proud of you." Just the truth, delivered plainly, the way Nora Callahan had always delivered truths, without wrapping paper, without apology, without softening the edges for the sake of the moment. Left on the table for you to pick up or walk away from. Because the truth doesn't require your comfort to be true. Nora picked it up. She always picked up the hard truths. That was something her mother had taught her, not by saying so, not by writing it down or sitting her down for a formal conversation about it, but by example. By the way she moved through the world with her shoulders back and her eyes forward and her voice steady, regardless of what was in the room or what the room wanted from her. Discipline was how the Callahans said love. Precision was how they said care. And showing up, being exactly where you said you would be, doing exactly what you said you would do, without complaint and without excuse and without requiring anyone to acknowledge the effort, was the highest form of respect they knew how to offer another person. Nora had understood this since she was a child. She had been reading maps since she was 10, at ranges across 4 different bases in 4 different states, following her parents through the mobile geography of a military family life. She had been shooting since she was 12. By 14, she had read every ballistics manual she could find, not because anyone asked her to, but because the numbers were interesting in the specific way that honest things are always interesting. They told you what was actually true, regardless of what you wanted be true. Her father, Thomas Callahan, had stood behind her on the range outside Killeen for years, arms crossed, the expression on his face that meant pride, but was not going to announce itself as such. Because Thomas Callahan was not a man who announced things. He demonstrated them. He showed up and watched and waited, and occasionally, when she was done with a sequence, said one word, "Agon," and she would shoot again. That was the whole curriculum, not instruction, not encouragement or praise or the scaffolding of explicit teaching. Just the steady, patient expectation of repetition until the thing became part of the body and could not be separated from it, until it wasn't something she did, until it was something she was. She carried that word with her always. Again, it was the most useful word she had ever been given. Fort Bragg in August was not a comfortable place to be. The air conditioning in the main briefing room had been broken for 3 days, which in August in North Carolina is not a minor inconvenience, but a sustained physical negotiation with the atmosphere that you are almost certainly going to lose. The kind of heat that settles into the corners and stays there. That makes the room feel smaller than its actual dimensions. 16 soldiers sat in plastic chairs arranged in 2 rows, their boots leaving prints of red clay across the concrete floor. Some were talking, some were cleaning gear. A few had achieved the particular art of sleeping with their eyes open, fully glazed, heads upright, responding to ambient sound without being conscious, which Nora had always privately considered one of the most genuinely useful skills a soldier could develop. She sat in the second row, third seat from the left. Reading her map, she had been reviewing the same section of Afghan Valley terrain for 4 days. Not because she didn't understand it. She understood it precisely, had understood its major contours within the first hour. She kept returning because every time she looked, the picture got more specific. The elevation intervals told one story. The drainage patterns told another. The wind exposure data she had pulled from the meteorological summaries told a third, and the third story was the most interesting because it explained things the first 2 couldn't by themselves. She was looking for the place where all 3 stories agreed, the point where topography and hydrology and atmospheric behavior converged on the same conclusion. She hadn't found it yet. The data always had something more to say if you were patient enough to listen. She was not thinking about the room when Lieutenant Derek Weston walked in. She heard him enter. She heard everything, had trained herself to register every change in the ambient sound of a space without interrupting whatever her eyes were doing. But she didn't look up. Not yet. She was waiting to understand what kind of room this was going to be. You could learn a great deal about a situation by watching how a new element moved through an existing one. What changed when it arrived? What stayed the same? What the room did when it wasn't yet sure what to do. Weston was 24 years old, fresh out of officer candidate school. His uniform had the quality of something that had never experienced weather. No fading, no softening at the creases, no evidence of the compromise that extended wear produces between fabric and the world. This was because, as Nora would learn later, he had pressed it again that morning before leaving his quarters. Not because it required pressing, but because the pressing was part of the presentation. And the presentation was something he had considered carefully. He carried a clipboard at a height slightly elevated above what the task required, just enough to make it visible as part of the entrance, rather than merely a tool he happened to have. He walked to the front of the room and scanned faces with the methodical attention of a man taking inventory. The room had been half alive with the low hum of soldiers existing between obligations. Then Weston stopped moving, and the sound faded, not all at once, gradually. The way a sound fades in a room when something has shifted and every nervous system has registered it before any conscious mind has processed what happened. Weston looked at the roster on the clipboard, looked up, found Nora. She met his gaze. Without expression, without moving. Without giving him anything to read that he had not already decided before he walked in. He looked back down at the roster. Then he said it. Who gave her that rifle? 5 words, said in the same tone someone uses to ask why the supply closet was left unlocked. Practical, mildly inconvenienced, entirely confident in the reasonableness of the question, which was the most dangerous thing about it. It was a question that sounded like administration and functioned like erasure. And everyone in the room understood both of those things simultaneously, and most of them would not say so out loud. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet in the half second after a pin has been pulled, and before anyone has decided what to do next. Nora did not flinch. She did not shift in her seat, did not change her breathing, did not look away from Weston or toward anyone else. Her hands, resting on her knees, stayed exactly where they were. The map stayed in her lap. Though she was no longer reading it, she had learned this. Not from a manual. From 11 years of rooms that had gone quiet, in exactly this way, at exactly this temperature, around exactly this kind of question. The question that is phrased as administrative concern but is actually something else entirely. Something everyone in the room understands and nobody says out loud. The most powerful response was nothing. Not because she had nothing to say. She had 11 years of achievements and documented performance to say it with. But the flinch was what they were looking for. The sharp breath, the sideways glance, the involuntary signal that the words had gotten through. And she had decided, in a different room, on a different base, in a different year, when she was younger, that she was not going to give anyone that signal. Not Weston, not anyone. SFC Raymond Okafor was sitting directly to her left. He cleared his throat. Okafor was 41 years old, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. A face that had arrived at its final, settled form years ago, weathered and still, with the particular quality of a man who has stopped being surprised by most things and has arrived, on the other side of that, at something that resembled wisdom. Not the wisdom of having figured everything out, the wisdom of knowing which things could not be figured out, and being at peace with that distinction. He was the kind of soldier other soldiers looked at before deciding how to react to something, the human barometer of any unit he was assigned to. If Okafor was unbothered, the situation was probably manageable. If Okafor was paying attention, you paid attention too. He had earned this through the specific gravity that accumulates in a person who has been present for enough things to be genuinely unintimidatable. He looked at Weston with an expression so flat it was almost polite. She came with the unit, sir. Same as the rest of us. Weston glanced at Okafor. Then back at Nora. I'm aware of how assignments work, Sergeant. That wasn't what I asked. Then I'm not sure I understand the question, sir. A pause. Longer this time. The kind of pause that has texture. Weston set the clipboard down on the small folding table at the front of the room, crossed his arms, tilted his head slightly. The way people do when they have decided the problem is comprehension rather than anything more complicated. What I'm asking, he said, measured now, careful, is what the designated role of this soldier is. And why she is carrying a long-range precision rifle. Because she's the designated marksman, sir. I can read the roster, Sergeant. Then you have your answer, sir. Daquan. Pontaquan. The silence that followed had weight. The kind of weight that everyone in a room feels on their skin, without being able to name exactly what they're feeling. Nora had sat inside silences like this before. She knew what they cost. She knew that Okafor had just spent professional capital on her behalf, and that he had done it without looking at her once, which was its own kind of intelligence. Looking at her would have made the moment about her, and Okafor was experienced enough to understand that the moment needed to be about the question and the answer, and the unit, not about the person the question had been designed to reduce. Weston uncrossed his arms. Picked up the clipboard. Right, he said. Let's get started. He moved on. No acknowledgement of what had just happened. No adjustment. Just forward, the way people move when they have decided that what they said was not actually a problem, and that moving forward is the most efficient way to ensure nobody else decides otherwise. Nora exhaled once, quietly, and turned her attention to the briefing. She had survived this kind of room before. She would survive it again. And she had learned that survival was the first requirement, not the last. Trunken afterward, Okafor found her outside. He had expected to find her processing something, the tight jaw. The controlled stillness people wear when they are containing something that wants more room than the situation allows. Instead, she was standing in the late afternoon light, reading the same topographical map. Like the briefing room had not happened at all, or had happened so far outside the range of things worth visible reaction that it simply had not registered on any scale she tracked. He stood beside her. "You all right?" "I'm reading a map, I can see that." "Then you have your answer," he almost smiled. "Didn't quite. I just want you to know." "I know," she said. "Thank you, a beat." "I've seen that kind before," she said. Not bitter. Observational. The tone of a weather report, long before today. I knew what was coming, before he walked in. I saw it in the clipboard. Okafor looked at her sideways. The clipboard, he held it higher than necessary. People who are secure in their authority don't display it. People who need to establish it do. The clipboard was the opening statement. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Processing. "So what's your plan?" She looked back at the map. "Do my job," she said, "every day, until the results speak for themselves." He stood there for a moment, turning that over. It was so simple it almost sounded like surrender. Like someone who had stopped expecting anything and was just going through the motions showing up. But it wasn't that. He could hear the difference. This was not resignation. This was a different kind of fight. The kind that doesn't make noise. The kind that is fought entirely through consistency and precision and the slow, patient accumulation of evidence that cannot be argued with. "That's a long game," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." The first 2 weeks under Weston's command, Nora observed this was what she did in every new environment. Before she spoke, she watched. Before she formed conclusions, she gathered data. Before she decided what something was, she watched what it did repeatedly, until the pattern was clear enough to trust. She had learned this from her mother, who had spent 22 years in intelligence, understanding that the most dangerous thing you could do in an unfamiliar situation was assume you already knew what it was. Assumptions closed off the peripheral information, and the peripheral information was often more important than whatever was in the center. She watched Weston run briefings. He was efficient. His information was current. His orders were clear, and he didn't waste time on unnecessary tangents. She would give him that. He was genuinely competent at the structural requirements of command, at the mechanics of moving information through a unit, turning it into coordinated action. He talked over people, not loudly, not rudely, just slightly before they were finished, as if he had already decided what they were going to say, and had determined that his response was more important than actually hearing them out. The conversational equivalent of running a yellow light, technically within the rules. Still a signal. She watched how he interacted with Okafor, respectful, careful, with the instinctive caution that some younger officers develop around senior NCOs, who radiate authority that has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with accumulated time. She watched how he interacted with the junior soldiers. Collegial, occasionally funny, deliberately approachable in a way that felt practiced rather than natural, not false. Exactly. Constructed. The version of ease that someone builds when ease doesn't come naturally to them. When they have decided that approachability is a leadership tool and have worked to develop it consciously. And she watched how he looked at her. Not directly, more like the specific half-second pause before he addressed something near her without addressing her. The way her contributions to briefings were absorbed into the general knowledge base of the room and then referenced her analysis, her language, her read, without attribution. The way her name never appeared in any report she had contributed to. Her assessment, her language, attributed generally to unit intelligence assessment. And always, in every briefing and every debrief and every radio transmission she could, overhear the designated marksman, not Callahan, not Sergeant Callahan, not Nora, the designated marksman, a function, a role, something the Army had assigned to a slot in his unit that happened to breathe and respond to orders. Not a person, not a name, a designation that could, in theory, be filled by anyone. And by calling her that, consistently, systematically, in every document and every reference, he was maintaining the fiction that it was true. She noticed. She kept working. One evening, cleaning weapons in the equipment bay, Okafor, beside her in the comfortable shared silence of soldiers who have worked alongside each other long enough to not need to fill every moment with words. He calls me the designated marksman, she said. Not a complaint, a weather report. The temperature is this. The wind is from that direction. Effect about conditions. Okafor kept working on his rifle. Didn't look up right away. I noticed. Does it bother you? He set down the cleaning rod, looked at her with the steady, measured attention he reserved for questions that deserved a real answer. It bothers me, he said, that he thinks it's subtle. Something almost moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Close enough to count. What's the source, do you think? Not the behavior. Underneath it, Okafor picked the cleaning rod back up. Considered. He's not a bad officer, he said slowly. Genuinely competent. He'll probably make captain and he'll probably deserve it on the technical merits. But he was trained in a world where certain things were supposed to be certain ways. And when they're not, when the thing in front of him doesn't match the shape he was taught to expect, he doesn't know where to put it. So he just pretends it isn't quite there. A pause. Easier than rearranging the furniture. Nora looked down at the barrel she was cleaning. That's a generous interpretation. I'm a generous man. Is that what you call it? He glanced at her sideways. The corner of his mouth compressed by approximately 2 millimeters. I call it accurate, he said. Generous would be saying he doesn't know what he's doing. He knows. He just hasn't decided whether to stop yet. They went back to silence. Nora kept thinking about what he'd said. Not the part about Weston's character. She had already arrived at similar conclusions through observation. The part about pretending the thing that doesn't fit isn't quite there. She understood the impulse. Not as an excuse, as a description of how people actually work. The world was easier when things matched the shapes you had been taught to expect. She had spent her entire adult life being a shape that didn't match, and she had watched repeatedly what happened in people when they encountered her. The brief recalibration, the search for the category that would make her make sense. And sometimes, when no category was accessible, quiet, persistent effort to reduce her to something smaller and more manageable, a function, a role, a slot that happened to breathe. What she had never been able to fully understand was how someone could watch her work, actually watch the results, actually look at the numbers, and still let what they had decided in advance override what was right in front of them. She filed that thought in the place where she kept things that were true and difficult and not yet actionable, and she kept cleaning. The rifle. PFC Tomas Vega was 20 years old, from San Antonio, and he had more questions than anyone Nora had ever encountered in 11 years of military service. Not rhetorical questions. Not questions designed to display his own intelligence. Genuine questions. The specific variety of curiosity that has not yet learned to be strategic about itself. That asks things directly because it actually wants to know the answers and has not yet understood that wanting to know is sometimes considered a social liability that would ordinarily have been a problem for Nora. It became unexpectedly. Something else third week, a training patrol through the hills north of the base. Afternoon light going sideways across the terrain, cutting hard shadows from the ridgelines. Vega fell into step beside her, the way he sometimes did. Not to talk necessarily, she had observed, but because he seemed to find something steadying about walking near someone who appeared to know exactly what they were doing. He was 4 months in country. Still in the phase where you are learning, that competence is mostly a collection of things you have already survived and figured out how to do again. They walked, in silence for a while then. Sergeant Callahan, what? Can I ask you something? You're going to regardless. Fair. He fell into proper step. Why are you looking at that ridge, northeast? About 900 meters, he looked. Nothing visible on the ridge. What about it? Wind coming through that valley creates a deflection corridor here. She indicated the space in front of them without breaking stride. Makes it an attractive observation position for anyone who wants to watch this patrol without being on the same elevation. He looked again, more carefully. Is there someone up there? No, then why? Because there might be tomorrow. Silence. A few steps. Then, that's kind of terrifying, it's just math. The terrifying part isn't the math, his voice was genuine. Not performing concern. Just thinking through what she had said. The terrifying part is that you're doing it constantly. While we're just walking, someone should be. He thought about that for several steps. Do you ever turn it off? She glanced at him sideways. 20 years old. Asking in the specific way of someone who actually wanted to know, not someone performing curiosity. Something about that was disarming in a way she hadn't anticipated. When I'm home, she said, mostly. What do you do when you're home? Read. What do you read? Mathematics, he stared. Sergeant, and other things. Sometimes you read math books for fun. I find them restful. He seemed to be deciding whether she was joking. She was not joking. The mathematics of ballistics was genuinely restful. The numbers didn't have agendas. They didn't have things to prove. They just told you what was true. That's... He stopped. Started again. You know what? I genuinely respect that. No irony. He dropped back half a step. You ask a lot of questions, she said. I know. My mom says the same thing. Your mom's right. He grinned. She didn't, but something in her posture shifted by some fraction of a degree. The kind of adjustment you would only see if you listened very carefully and already knew what you were looking for. Okafor, 10 feet back, was watching very carefully. He noted the fraction of a degree adjustment, said nothing. Kept walking. October 14th, briefing room, 0800. Nora had been awake since 0430, not from anxiety. Her brain did not wait for the alarm. It began running calculations approximately 40 minutes before she needed it to, as if impatient for the work to begin. Wind patterns, elevation differentials. The data she had spent the past week organizing and approaching from different angles until it stopped being a collection of data points and started being a shape. A consistent, specific, unmistakable shape that kept pointing in the same direction, regardless of how she approached it. She sat in her chair. Roster in front of Weston. Map on the wall. The room the same as always. Plastic chairs. Concrete floor. 16 soldiers, doing what soldiers do in the intervals between things. She raised her hand. Sergeant Callahan, Weston said. He used her name in direct address. She had observed this consistently. When he needed her to do something specific, when the operational moment required the actual person and not just the function, he used her name. It was only in the written record, in the documents that would persist after the moment was over, that the name disappeared and the designation appeared. The movement signature south approach over the last 4s indicate pre-positioning activity, she said. Level. Informational. The same tone she used to report weather data. Not the tone of someone making a case, but the tone of someone reporting what is observable by anyone looking. Specifically, the pattern is consistent with a crew-served weapon being moved toward a fire support position within the valley. The intervals are narrowing. Whatever is being positioned is approaching its final location. The room was quiet. Weston looked at his briefing notes. Our intelligence indicates general elevated activity in that sector. Yes, sir. I'm suggesting the activity has a specific character that is being underweighted by that classification. The intervals and locations are consistent with mortar pre-positioning rather than general patrol movement. The two patterns look different when compared to historical pre-engagement signatures. Noted Sergeant, he looked up from his notes. Confirm your equipment status for the brief. There it was. Not. Sergeant Callahan, do you have supporting data for that red? Not. Walk us through the specific pattern differences. Designated marksman. Confirm equipment status. A function asked to confirm that it was operational and ready to be used. A different thing entirely from asking a person whether they had anything further to contribute. Okafor, in the front row, shifted in his seat by approximately 3 millimeters. No one who wasn't watching for it would have caught it. Nora said, "Equipment confirmed, sir." She did not push back. She had made the assessment. She had put it on the table in the form of a clear, specific, sourced claim. What happened to it from here was not entirely within her control. But she made a decision in that moment, quietly, without announcement, without anything in her posture or expression to indicate that a decision had been made about what was. She was going to be ready, whatever the assessment classifications said, whatever higher command called it. When the moment arrived, and in her experience, the moment always arrived, it never paused to ask whether anyone had listened to the person who had seen it coming. She was going to be positioned and calibrated and prepared. That was the thing she controlled, so she would control it completely. After the briefing, the hallway, Okafor was leaning against the wall. The lean of someone who has been there long enough to hear the general shape of what had happened inside, without needing every specific word. They kicked back the assessment, Nora said. I heard. General elevated activity. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then, how sure are you? She looked at him. She was not a person who said very sure, or fairly confident, or any of the graduated qualifications that make uncertainty sound like humility, and humility sound like wisdom. Those phrasings were for situations where she actually wasn't sure. This was not one of those situations, Raymond, she held his gaze steadily. I'm sure. He pushed off the wall. Looked down the hallway toward the operations room, then back at her. Something in his expression had shifted from his usual careful neutral to something rarer. Something that on Okafor's face looked almost like concern. Not reactive worry, but the attentive, specific concern of someone who takes a situation seriously. Then be ready, he said. Whatever they call it up the chain. Be ready. She nodded once. Always am. They went back to work. What happened next was not in any briefing document or official record. It happened at Zotuhurd on October 17th, in the small operations room that served as Weston's command space. Folding table, laptop, a radio that worked when it wanted to. Weston was alone. Nora's assessment was on the table in front of him, printed out, which he had not mentioned to anyone. He was reading it for the third time, not skimming, reading. Looking for the place where it fell apart, because if he could find that place, everything became simpler. He could not find that place. He understood the pattern she had identified. The movement intervals, the narrowing distances, the geometry of it, which was not the geometry of patrol movement or general reconnaissance. He had been taught enough pattern recognition at OCS to know what prepositioning signatures looked like when they were being described by someone who understood them. She was describing a mortar team moving into position. He understood this. He had understood it on some level since the second reading 2 days ago. And there was a part of him, not a large part, and one he was not going to acknowledge to anyone, including himself, for very long, that knew she was right. Not probably right, right, because right came with a cost. Right meant he had received this assessment 4 days ago and looked at it and classified it as within the margin of general elevated activity and moved forward. Right meant there was a gap between what he had done and what he should have done. and that gap had his signature on it, and his signature on a gap of that kind. At 24 years old, in his first command, being watched by every senior NCO in the unit, being evaluated by every officer above him, was not something he knew how to carry. The framework he had been given was for being right, for making decisions and having those decisions prove correct, for walking into rooms with confidence because the confidence was earned. Admitting the assessment was correct meant admitting the previous 4 days had been spent being wrong. He put the assessment face down on the table, turned off the desk lamp. She's probably wrong, he told himself. He did not believe that, but he needed it to be probable enough to carry him through the next 12 hours. Tomorrow he could look at it again. Tomorrow the picture might be clearer. He went to his cot, did not sleep well, told himself it was because of the heat. 3 days before the assessment was filed, before Nora raised her hand in the briefing room, Okafor had not meant to overhear. He had been in the corridor outside the Brigade S2's temporary office space, waiting, the way you wait in military corridors, which is to say standing and not moving, and technically not listening, but also not actively filtering. He was there for an administrative reason that had nothing to do with Nora's assessment or the valley. A routing approval that should have taken like 10 minutes and had been taking 40. While he waited, 2 officers inside the adjacent office had a conversation they did not realize was audible through the door. Not a long conversation. Long enough. First voice, the movement pattern she flagged. I've seen it before. Garmser, 2007, classic pre-petitioning signature. Second voice. If we acknowledge that. First voice. We'd have to revise the assessment. Second voice. Which means we'd have to explain flag it 4 days ago when it was the same pattern. Silence. First voice. Yeah. The sound of a folder closing. Footsteps moving toward the back of the office. Okafor stood in the corridor for a moment without moving. He had been in the Army for 21 years. He had been present for a considerable number of decisions made by institutions, protecting themselves from the cost of being wrong. He understood the mechanism. It was not unique to any branch, any unit, any nation. It was what large organizations did when acknowledging an error created more institutional pain than absorbing the consequences of not acknowledging it. The math was simple. The path of least exposure was to leave the assessment unchanged, not because it was accurate, because accurate would cost something that inaccurate would not. He thought about Nora, who had known before she filed the report that it might disappear into this exact machinery, who had filed it anyway, not because she expected it to change anything immediately. Because the date stamp on a correct read was permanent, even when nobody acted on it. Especially when nobody acted on it, the record would exist. And when the record proved itself necessary, the record would be there to say what it had always said. He did not tell her what he had overheard. She had work to do. They both did. And the truth was, she already knew. She had known before she put her name on it. She had filed it anyway. That was who she was. October 19th, late afternoon. The improvised shooting range on the east side of the base. Vega found her there at 16:30. She was working at the farthest target. He watched from behind the safety barrier for a few minutes before saying anything, watching the stillness of her when she was behind the scope. The way she became something other than a person in those moments. Or more completely a person. It was hard to say which. Something that had stopped operating in the normal range of visible human reaction and had concentrated entirely into the calculation. He looked at the target, tried to estimate the distance, arrived at a number that seemed wrong, looked again. The number was still wrong, which meant it was probably right. Sergeant Callahan, what? Is that 1,200 meters? Yes, he stared. That's past the published effective range of your rifle. Yes, you're shooting past the published effective range. Yes, she fired. He could tell she hit by the micro-adjustment in her posture in the half-second after the trigger. The small settling that comes when a calculation has been confirmed by the physical world. Why? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Let one more shot go. Watched the small adjustment she needed to make. Logged something in the green notebook she kept in her left chest pocket. Because in 9 days we go back to that ridge, she said. And whatever is in that valley is going to be further than 1,200 meters. The way she said it, quiet, flat, the tone of someone reading a fact from a reliable source, made something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature dropping. But the lieutenant said higher command classified the activity as. I know what they classified it as, but you still think. She pulled back from the scope. Looked at him directly. Vega, she held his gaze without expression. If I'm wrong, nothing happens. I practiced at a distance I didn't need. I used some ammunition. That is the complete cost of being wrong. She looked back at the target. If I'm right and I'm not ready. She stopped. I'm always going to choose ready. He stood there for a moment. The range nearly empty now. The light going gold at the edges. Then he sat down on the ground behind the barrier. And he watched her shoot for the next 45 minutes without saying a word. He watched her log results. Watched her adjust. Watched her log again. The practice was not random repetition but a systematic progression. Each session adding information to a body of data she was building. With the same patience and precision she applied to everything. She was not hoping. She was calculating. And each shot either confirmed the calculation or provided data to improve it. When she finally stood and slung the rifle, he stood too. Same time tomorrow? He asked. She looked at him. I won't talk, he said. Mostly, a beat. Mostly, she repeated. I'll genuinely try. She walked toward the barracks. He stood at the range and watched her go and felt something he did not have a precise word for. Yet. Something between admiration and the specific kind of humility that levels from standing next to someone operating you cannot currently reach. He was 20 years old. 4 months in country, he had just watched him shoot past the limits the manual said existed. Every shot, every time. Later, he found Okafor told him what he had seen. Okafor listened without interrupting. When Vega finished, there was a pause. She's been out there every evening for 6 days, Okafor said. Vega stared at him. You knew? I know. Should we be doing something? She's already doing it. The only thing we can do is make sure we're behind her when it matters. Why aren't you trying to stop her? Okafor picked up his coffee, looked at it for a moment. Then at Vega. Because she's not wrong. And people who aren't wrong and are willing to do the work, you don't stop them, you get out of their way. And you make sure nobody else gets in it either. What Okafor did? He did without announcing it. He ensured the range officer knew the east sector was in use each evening, and to route other personnel through alternate paths. He resolved a scheduling conflict on day 4 that would have required Nora's presence at a 1700 briefing during her practice window. Handled quietly, without involving Nora, without explaining why he had prioritized it the way he had. He said nothing to her about any of it. He just made sure the space existed. That was his version of belief, not words. Not gestures or expressions of confidence. Just the practical work of removing obstacles so that the thing that needed to happen could happen. She would understand this later, when there was enough distance to see the shape of what he had done. In the moment, she only knew that nothing had gotten in the way. She was grateful for things she could not fully see. That was a different kind of gratitude from the kind that has an object. Quieter, larger, and more durable. Darn Hollis found her on day 5. Hollis was 23 years old, from Portland, and had the quality of still water. Quiet on the surface, difficult to read, and probably deeper than you assumed. He had been in the unit for 7 months. In those 7 months, Okafor had heard him say approximately 3 complete sentences that were not directly operationally necessary. He appeared at the range at 1640 on the 5th evening, stood at the barrier, watched Nora shoot for several minutes. Then he said, "Past the published range," she said. "Yes, yes," he said. Consistently, she said, "Yes." He nodded once, turned, walked back toward the barracks. That was the complete conversation, and somehow it was one of the more satisfying exchanges she'd had in weeks. Because Hollis had not needed her to explain or justify or contextualize. He had observed what was happening, named it accurately, confirmed it with her, and left. He did not require anything from her beyond the confirmation. There was a specific kind of respect in that. The respect of people who don't need the thing explained to them. There was one other conversation that mattered. On October 20th, a training patrol through the hills north of the base. Vega had been quiet for 40 minutes. Unusual enough to notice. "Can I ask you something?" "You always do. It's a real question." "That's actually the problem." She kept walking, reading the terrain. Ask, "Do you ever get angry?" She didn't answer right away. "About what specifically?" "About," he gestured vaguely. 3 weeks of a lieutenant who said the designated marksman, like it, was a serial number. An assessment filed and dismissed. 14 documents where she appeared as a function. All of it. A beat. "Who said I don't get angry?" He blinked. You never show. I don't show you everything, Vega." That landed. He walked for a few seconds in actual silence, actually processing rather than preparing his next sentence. "So, where does it go?" I asked. She considered telling him to drop it. She usually would have. She was not interested in performing emotional openness as a conversational obligation. But Vega was not performing curiosity. He was actually asking, and there was something about the unstrategic directness of it that got through the usual filters. "Into the calculation," she said. "What does that mean?" "Anger is energy, like everything else. You can spend it on the situation, which changes nothing, or you can put it somewhere useful." She checked the upper slope. "Clear. I put it somewhere useful. Like the math." "Like the math," he nodded slowly, working through it. "So when you're out there every evening, shooting past the range limit." "Yes, that's useful anger." He was quiet for longer. Then, "That is the most intense thing I have ever heard from another human being. I mean that as a sincere compliment." She almost smiled. The corner of her mouth. An infinitesimal thing that arrived and departed before it could be confirmed. "I know you do," she said. October 21st. 2 days before everything, Nora did not sleep. This was not new. She had not slept well on any deployment since her first one, when she discovered that her brain did not have a reliable off switch, and that the calculations she ran all day simply continued in the dark, the way a river continues, whether anyone is watching it or not. She had made peace with this. She slept in intervals, but the night of the 21st was different. She lay in the dark and ran through the valley problem. The position at bearing 247, the distance. The wind she had tracked every for 6 days at that elevation, a consistent westerly drift, lighter than the valley floor average, requiring specific compensation. She had already internalized until it wasn't a thought anymore, just a physical fact, just part of what her hands knew, the drop calculation. 47 meters of arc between the muzzle and a target at 1,840 meters. 47 meters sounded impossible until you worked through the physics, and then it was just a number. A number with specific implications you accounted for. She thought about her mother. Now it starts getting hard. She thought about her father, on the range behind her, again, and she let herself feel something she very rarely allowed to surface completely. Tired, not of the work, not of the math, not of the army. Tired of having to prove the same thing repeatedly to different people in different rooms. Tired of being right and still having to argue for it. Tired of the specific erosion that comes from being the shape that doesn't fit in a world that finds it easier to pretend the shape isn't there. She let that tiredness move through her, fully, honestly, without containing it or redirecting it before it had run its course. She had learned that feelings suppressed in the dark were the ones that found you at the worst possible moments. Better to sit with them. You had the space. When the tiredness had moved through and settled, and what remained underneath was quieter and more solid. She was still going to be ready. The tiredness was real. The readiness was real. Both were true simultaneously. That was not a contradiction. That was just the truth of what it cost. She got up at 0247, went to the equipment bay, checked her rifle. Every component, every seal, every point of tension. Nothing left to assumption. Faith was for things you couldn't calculate. Everything she could calculate, she went back to her cot. Closed her eyes. The valley was 1,840 meters away, waiting. She was ready. There was one thing she did before she finally closed her eyes. That night, she opened the front cover of her notebook and took out the photograph she kept folded there. Her mother in uniform. Her father beside her in his work clothes, one hand on her mother's shoulder, the gesture of a man who does not make grand displays of affection, but has found the small, consistent ones and committed to them for life. Nasser herself at 17, on the range outside Killeen, holding a rifle and looking at something just off camera, with an expression so focused it was almost fierce. The expression of someone who is not performing concentration, but is simply concentrated, for whom the thing in front of her is, at this particular moment, the only thing in the world. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She thought about the kitchen table in Killeen. Now it starts getting hard. She thought about the range behind the house, her father's arms crossed, the expression that meant pride, and wasn't going to say so. Again, she thought about all the rooms that had gone quiet in that specific way. All the reports where she was a function. All the assessments she had made that had been received as interference rather than informations. She thought about 14 documents where she was the designated marksman, and never once Nora Callahan. And she thought about tomorrow, about a ridge in southern Afghanistan, about a valley floor and a number, 840, that she had spent 9 evenings embedding into her hands until it wasn't a number anymore but a physical fact. Until it lived in the space between heartbeats the way her own name lived there. She folded the photograph. Put it back. October 23rd was coming, whether she was ready or not. She was ready. She had been ready for 9 days. She closed her eyes and let the darkness be what it was. The memo arrived on a Tuesday, 2 lines. Reich rest denied. Proceed with mission parameters signed, dated. Okafor held it for a moment in the hallway outside the operations room. Morning light coming through the window at the wrong angle. The kind that makes everything look slightly more tired than it actually is. That flattens color and adds weight to ordinary things. He read it twice, folded it, put it in his breast pocket. Walked to the mess hall. Poured a cup of coffee that had been sitting on the burner for approximately 2 hours longer than it should. Drank it anyway. Looked out the window at the mountains. 21 years. That was how long he had been doing this. 21 years of briefings and patrols and after-action reports and the particular grinding arithmetic of institutional life, where the right answer and the approved answer were sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. He had learned to live in that gap. Most experienced soldiers did. You learn to operate inside the approved answer and trust that the right answer would eventually surface in some form after the full cost had been paid by whoever paid it. He was looking at those mountains and wondering, for the first time in a long time, whether that trust had been misplaced. Because Nora Callahan's assessment was not a fringe read. It was not speculation or overreading by an analyst trying to establish relevance. It was the correct read. He knew it. The officers whose conversation he had overheard outside the S2's office 3 days ago knew it. And somewhere behind that memo, behind the 2 lines and the signature and the date, someone else knew it too. 3 different kinds of knowing. 3 different choices about what to do with it. The assessment would stay as written. General elevated activity. Not because it was accurate, because accurate would cost something that inaccurate would not. The revision, the explanation, the acknowledgement that the signal had been there 4 days ago and nobody had acted on it. Institutions did not make those calculations consciously. They did not conspire. They simply moved, collectively and without discussion, in the direction of least exposure. He finished the coffee, stood up, went back to work. The only thing he could control was whether the space existed for her to do what needed to be done, so he would control that completely. What the memo meant, practically. The assessment filed on October 14th would remain classified as General Elevated Activity. The patrol scheduled for October 23rd would proceed with original parameters. Whatever was in that valley would remain officially unacknowledged until the moment it proved itself on a ridge in front of 12 people who had been told not to expect it. Okafor understood all of this. He also understood that Nora had known before she filed the report. She had filed it anyway, not because she expected it to change anything immediately, but because the date stamp on a correct read was permanent, even when nobody acted on it. Especially when nobody acted on it. The record would exist. When the moment arrived, the record would say what it had always said. That mattered to her, not for credit. Because honest accountings of events mattered. Full stop. There was another thing Okafor understood, standing in the mess hall that Tuesday morning with 2-hour-old coffee and a memo that said what it said. He understood why the system had made the choice it had, not excusing it. Understanding it, because understanding was the only way to work around it, and working around it was the only thing he could do. The system had made a calculation. The calculation was, what costs less, revising the assessment or absorbing the consequences of not revising it? The honest answer, from the system's point of view, was absorbing the consequences. If the assessment was revised, someone had to explain why it wasn't right the first time. If the consequences came, if whatever was in that valley turned out to be what Nora said it was. The system could attribute it to the fog of war, the inherent uncertainty of intelligence, the limitations of available data. No single person would have to say I was wrong and I knew it and I made a choice. The system was not malicious. It was just protecting itself the way systems did, quietly, collectively, without discussion, in the direction that minimized visible cost, and Nora had known this before she filed the report. He was sure of it. She had filed it anyway. Not because she expected the system to respond differently than systems respond. Because the date stamp on a correct assessment was permanent. Because the record would exist. Because when the consequences came, and she had clearly believed they would come, the record would show who had been right and when, regardless of what the system had done with that information. She had already accepted that the system would fail. She was working anyway. That, Okafor thought, was a specific kind of courage he did not have a good word for. Not bravery. Bravery was for moments of acute danger. This was something slower and more sustained. The courage of someone who has accepted the full cost of the thing they are doing, and is doing it anyway, without requiring the world to be different than it is. He rinsed his cup, went back to work, made sure the space existed, so she had filed it, let it stand, and gone back to work. That was who she was. And every evening, while the rest of the unit moved through the rituals of soldiers with time between obligations, card games, phone calls home, the social gravity of shared boredom, Nora went to the range, alone, with her rifle. And a number. Day 1, 900 meters already past standard combat effective range for the M11N. Already in the territory where the manual uses language like not recommended. Phrases that mean, we cannot guarantee this and carry the implicit suggestion that you should not try. Nora had always understood that as two separate things. She was not asking the manual to guarantee anything. She was doing her own math. She shot at 900 meters the way she shot at everything, methodically, adjusting for variables, logging results in the small green notebook she kept in her left chest pocket, in the small, precise handwriting that took nothing for granted, and left nothing to assumption. Every shot a data point. Every data point a refinement of the calculation. Day 300 meters. 400. Day 7, 600. Day 8, 1 and 750. Day 9, Satan 40. She held 840 for an hour on the final evening. Not because she needed more repetitions, because she wanted the number to live in her hands as completely as it lived in her head. She wanted the physics so thoroughly internalized that in the moment, when the decision would have to be made in fractions of a second, there would be nothing to decide. Just the already done work arriving at its conclusion. When she put the rifle down, the range was empty, the base quiet, the mountains dark shapes against a sky that had not yet fully committed to being night. The manual said it couldn't be done. The physics said it depended on the calculation. She had done the calculation, day 1 through 9, told a story, if you knew how to read it, fought. Day 1 was about confirmation, confirming that the weapon system and the body and the calculation could hold together past the published limit. The first shot at 900 meters was not an act of ambition. It was a diagnostic. She was checking the instrument, making sure nothing had changed between the manual's numbers and the numbers as they actually behaved. Day 3 was about pattern. 3 days in, the data was beginning to have shape. The wind at this elevation, at this hour, was not random. It had character. It drifted leftward in the morning, settled toward neutral by midday, drifted slightly right by late afternoon. She had 3 mornings of data. She logged it all. Day 5 was about distance as concept rather than limit. At 14,400 meters, something changed in the way the problem felt. The target was no longer a thing she was shooting at. It was a point in a mathematical space defined by variables she was controlling, or not controlling in the case of wind and temperature, but tracking, measuring, building enough of a model that the uncontrolled variables became predictable rather than surprising. Day 7 was about calibration. 600 meters was the distance she had been moving toward since day 1, and arriving there was not a triumph, but a checkpoint. She spent the session not celebrating the distance, but systematically confirming that every calculation she had made for days 1 through 6 still held at the new scale, that the model was valid, that it would still be valid at 1,750. Day 8 was a bridge. 1,750 meters was 10 meters closer than she needed to be. She knew that. She shot at 1,750 on day 8 because she wanted the body to know what 840 would feel like before she was there. She wanted the first shot at 1840 to feel familiar rather than new. Day 9. 1 to 8, the first shot landed. She did not allow herself any reaction to that. She logged it, adjusted fractionally. Shot again. Hit she shot for an hour. Every shot confirmed. Every confusion logged. When she finally stood and walked back toward the barracks, Okafor was sitting on a crate near the range entrance. He had arrived at some point during the session. She didn't know when. He had not announced himself, and she had not looked up. He looked at her. She looked at him. Done, she said. Good, he said. That was all. Vega found her on day 3. He came around the barrier and sat down next to it, not behind it, next to it, which was either confidence or obliviousness, and she decided it was the second. He was 20 years old. He didn't always know when he was intruding, and there was something about honest obliviousness that was less irritating than calculated casualness would have been. He watched her shoot for a while, watched her log. Then, can I ask? No, I haven't even, no. I was going to ask if you wanted water. She lowered the rifle slightly. A pause. Yes, she said, actually. He produced a water bottle from his jacket with the specific triumph of someone who has planned for exactly this contingency. She took it, drank, handed it back. He stayed for 40 minutes. When she finally stood and slung the rifle, he stood too. Same time tomorrow? He asked. I won't talk, he said. Mostly, she repeated. I'll genuinely try. She walked toward the barracks. He stood at the range and watched her go. and felt something he did not have a precise word for yet. Something between admiration and the specific humility that comes from standing next to someone operating at a level you can see clearly but cannot currently reach. He was 20 years old, 4 months in country. He had just watched a woman shoot past the limits the manual said existed. Every shot. Every time. Darren Hollis found her on day 5. He stood at the barrier, watched her shoot for several minutes, then said, "Past the published range." She said, "Yes," he said. Consistently, she said, "Yes." He nodded once, turned, walked back toward the barracks' complete conversation. And somehow it was one of the more satisfying exchanges she'd had in weeks. Because Hollis had not needed her to explain or justify or frame it for his comfort. He had observed what was happening, named it accurately, confirmed it with her, and left. He did not require anything from her beyond the confirmation. There was a specific kind of respect in that, the respect of people who don't need the thing explained to them. On the evening of day 6, Vega arrived at the range and found Okafor already there, not shooting, not running drills. Just standing at the barrier, watching Nora at the far end of the range, arms crossed, expression doing the thing it did when Okafor was thinking, and did not intend to be interrupted. Vega stood beside him.
Watched for a moment. "How long has she been at WIT 600? He asked quiet.
"Since yesterday. What's she going to?" "Don't ask me to predict her," Okafor said. "Watch her." So Vega watched. He watched her make 3 shots in sequence, each one adjusting from the last, each adjustment logged before the next shot went. He watched her work through something with the patient, systematic attention of a person who is not hoping for a lucky break but building toward a reliable one. After the 3rd shot, she paused, looked at the notebook, made a small mark. She's going to 1,750 tomorrow. Vega said. Okafor looked at him sideways. "Because she's done with 1,600. Vega said. "The way she just closed the notebook. That's not a note about what to adjust. That's the note that says it's done. She's closing out the distance." Okafor was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "You knew that." "I did. You were testing me. I was seeing if you were paying attention." A pause. "You are." Vega looked at him. "She's going to 1,840 by day 9. That's the distance. The valley." Okafor didn't answer. He didn't have to. What Okafor did during those 9 days, he did without announcement. He ensured the range officer kept the east sector clear each evening. He resolved a scheduling conflict on day 4 that would have required Nora's presence at a 1700 briefing during her practice window, handled quietly, without involving her, without explanation of why he had prioritized it the way he had. On day 7, he redirected a qualification drill that would have taken the East Range. None of this required heroism. It required 21 years of knowing how institutions actually worked, who had discretion over what, where the small frictions were, how to remove them without creating new ones. He made sure the space existed. Said nothing about it to her, because saying something would have shifted the weight to her. This weight was his to carry. She had enough. She would understand later, when there was enough distance to see the shape of what had happened. In the moment, she only knew that nothing had gotten in the way. She was grateful for things she could not fully see. A quieter kind of gratitude, and in some ways more honest about what gratitude actually was. October 20th. Training patrol through the hills north of the base. 3 days before the ridge, Vega had been quiet for 40 minutes. "Unusual, can I ask you something?" "Ask." "Do you ever get angry?" She didn't answer right away. "About what specifically?" "About..." He gestured vaguely at 3 weeks of the designated marksman like it was a serial number. An assessment filed and dismissed, 14 documents where she appeared as a function and never as a person. All of it. "Who said I don't get angry?" He blinked. You never show." "I don't show you everything, Vega." He walked for a few seconds in actual silence, processing rather than preparing his next sentence. "So, where does it go?" he asked. into the calculation. Anger is energy. You can spend it on the situation, which could nothing. Or you can put it somewhere useful. She checked the upper slope. Clear. I put it somewhere useful, like the math. Like the math. He nodded, slowly, thinking it through. So when you're out there every evening, shooting past the limit, yes, that's useful anger. Yes, a pause. Then. That is the most intense thing I have ever heard from a human being. I mean that as a complete and sincere compliment. She almost smiled, the corner of her mouth. An infinitesimal thing that arrived and departed. I know you do, she said. October 22nd. Final briefing. 1900 hours. Weston covered the route, the timing, the ROE, the extract protocol. Organized, clear. Efficient. He did not waste time, which remained the thing he did well regardless of anything else. Okafor raised his hand. Rules of engagement, sir. If we identify an active mortar position before it fires, eyes only. Observe and report. Engage only if engaged first. Okafor nodded. The nod Nora had learned to read across 3 weeks of this unit. I disagree. And this conversation is not over. It is paused. Get some sleep. We move at 0 for 3 no. He walked out. Okafor stood, turned to face the unit, voice level, unhurried. Check your gear tonight. All of it. Check it again in the morning. He looked at Nora for exactly 1 second. She looked back. Everything that needed to be said was in that second. 9 days of evenings at the range, cleared, scheduling conflicts. A corridor where he had stood and listened and understood and chosen. Be ready. I made sure there was space. The rest is yours. I know I am. That night, Weston sat alone in the operations room, 0130, desk lamp on, Nora's assessment on the table in front of him. He had stopped counting how many times he had read it. The pattern had not changed across any of the readings. It still said the same thing. A crew-served weapon. Pre-positioning signatures consistent with mortar emplacement. Intervals narrowing toward a final location. She was right. He knew it the same way he had known it on the second reading, 10 days ago. Nothing new had come in. No alternative explanation had surfaced to make the original pattern look like something less specific. She had been right 10 days ago. He had known it 10 days ago. And he had turned off the lamp and told himself she was probably wrong. He sat with that now without moving. Not reaching for anything, just sitting with the full weight of what it actually was. Not a reasonable judgment call that had turned out poorly in retrospect. A choice, a specific, deliberate choice made in full possession of the relevant information. Made because the cost of being wrong in front of his unit had felt more manageable than the cost of 12 people going up a ridge without the preparation they deserved. He turned off the desk lamp, went to his cot, did not sleep. The last thing she did, before she closed her eyes, was check her rifle one final time. Not because she hadn't already checked it. She had checked it twice. But the third check was not about finding something wrong. It was about confirmation, about the specific ritual of a person that preparation is not a single act but a sustained commitment, and that the final repetition of the ritual is not redundant but necessary. The same way, the last step of a calculation is still a step even when you already know the answer. She checked every component, every seal, every point of tension. Clean, correct, complete. She set it down, thought for a moment about the 9 days behind her. The green notebook filled with data, the distances logged, the adjustments made. The pattern of Vega arriving with water, the single conversation with Hollis that had lasted 4 sentences. Okafor's presence at the range entrance on the final evening saying, done and good, and nothing else. 9 days of work that would either be enough tomorrow morning or would never be enough. The math said it would be enough. The math had said so consistently for 9 days, from 9 different approaches. She trusted the math. She had done the work. October 23rd was coming whether she was ready or not. She was ready. She closed her eyes and let the dark be what it was, 0.0412, the staging area. Nora was already outside when the first soldiers started moving. The air was cold in the way of high-altitude desert before sunrise, thin and sharp, like breathing through something that hasn't quite decided to be air yet. The mountain's dark shapes against a sky beginning, at the eastern edge, to reconsider the idea of night. She stood with her rifle and her eyes on the ridge, ran the numbers one final time: wind, temperature, distance, drop, drift, time of flight the same as last night, the same as 9 days ago. They did not change because she wanted them to. They did not change because she feared them. They were simply what they were. That was the thing about mathematics she had always found more clarifying than anything else. It did not have preferences. It did not account for rank or what someone had decided before they walked into a room. It just told you what was true, and it kept telling you the same true thing every time you asked. Okafor appeared beside her. "You sleep?" "Some, me neither." They looked at the same ridge. "How are you feeling?" "Settled," she said. Settled or unsettled. Big difference. He was quiet a moment. Then, "I told Sergeant Webb to position Vega and Hollis on the east face. Clear sight line south and southwest. Nobody in your lane." Weston approved that positioning? Weston approved the patrol formation. Webb is positioning his element within that formation. His expression stayed exactly neutral. Within his discretionary authority, as senior NCO of the secondary element, the most carefully worded sentence she had ever heard him speak. "Raymond." He looked at her. "Thank you, don't." He started toward the staging area. "Just do what you do." She watched him go. Then she turned back to the ridge, foot 0430. They moved. The climb took 2 hours. Nora spent those 2 hours reading the environment, the air, the elevation change under her boots, the gradient of the wind as they gained altitude, lighter than predicted. She logged it without breaking stride. A small adjustment to the leftward compensation. In combination with everything else, it mattered. Vega was behind her. Steady breathing. A little fast, but controlled. He had gotten better at this over the deployment. The body learns what it has to when the alternative is worse. At the 40-minute mark, barely audible, Sergeant Callahan. "If this goes the way you think it might, I just want you to know." "Don't. I haven't said it yet. You're going to say you trust me, beat." "How did you?" "Because you're 20 years old, and you're scared, and it's the thing people say when they're scared." She kept climbing. "Don't tell me. Show me. Stay in your position. Keep your head down when I tell you to." "Yes." "Sergeant, good." The ridge was 20 minutes away. 0617. He reached it, light coming up fast, not gradually, in stages, each one revealing more of the valley below. The floor first, then the far ridge line, then the middle ground, filling in like a map being drawn in real time. Nora moved to her position on the south face. The one Okafor and Webb had arranged. Clear line south and southwest. Nobody in her lane. She settled into position, rifle, ground, breathing. Scope, put her eye to the glass and stopped. 1 full second, because the valley was not empty. The disturbed ground she had been tracking for 9 days was not disturbed ground anymore. There was a tube. 3 personnel, moving with the specific, deliberate geometry of people who have arrived at a destination and are setting up, not passing through, setting up. Base plate going down, bipod adjusted. And one of them, moving in the specific way of someone issuing instructions, rather than following them. She knew which one was the commander before she had consciously formed the thought. She keyed her radio, immediately. Callahan to actual. Visual confirmation, crew-served weapon, bearing 247. Mortar tube, 3, personnel preparation phase. Not yet hot. Weston, say again. Mortar tube, 3 personnel. Valley floor, bearing 247. Setting up. Not yet in firing position. Approximately 4 to 6 minutes based on current activity. Pause. Can you confirm tube classification? 82 millimeter. Tube length and size of rounds being staged. Another pause. Below, the base plate at a steeper angle. The second figure pressing it into the ground. The commander looking up, not directly at the ridge, but toward it. toward the direction of elevated terrain where an observer might be. The math that had been running for 9 days now had a deadline, sir. We need a decision. In the next 3 minutes, hold positions. I'm calling higher for guidance. Oka, for. How long for higher to respond? However long it takes, Sergeant, sir. If that tube goes hot before we have guidance, we absorb the first shot. 12 personnel, exposed ridge. No cover. A ranging shot will not miss everyone. Hold your position. Direct order. Net went quiet, below, the base plate fully set. The soldier with the ammunition had a round in his hands, moving toward the tube. The commander had turned away from the ridge, satisfied, apparently, that the ridge was outside effective range, and turned his attention back to the tube. She keyed the secondary channel. Okafor, I see it. Baseplate's in. He's handling a round, copy. 2 minutes, maybe less copy. 60 seconds on the command net. Weston's voice faint, the one-sided rhythm of someone transmitting to higher, asking, waiting. The sound of a system deciding whether to let the person on the ground do what needed to be done. The commander said something. The soldier lifted the round toward the tube. Nora moved her finger to the trigger guard. Not on the trigger, on the guard. Ready without committed. The last stillness in. Hold. Out the space between the exhale and the next inhale. The still point. The fraction of a second when the body is neither inhaling nor exhaling, and the only thing left is the calculation and 9 days of work that is either enough or isn't on the command net. Weston's voice. Quiet. No performance. Callahan, sir, what is your confidence level? 1 breath. In, out, high. Distance 1,840 meters, 4 seconds. She counted. Sergeant Callahan, sir, can you make that shot? She looked through the scope. The commander, slightly left of the tube, arms crossed, watching the breach, unaware, operating inside the certainty that doctrines had made him safe. Doctrine was wrong. The physics knew. She found the still point. Yes, she said 1 word. No hedging, no qualification, just yes. Because the math was done. Take the shot. The net went silent. She moved her finger from the guard to the trigger, found the commander in the scope. Still at the tube, still unaware, still standing inside a certainty the math had already disproved. The Afghan morning air was thin and cold, and the wind was exactly where she had calculated it would be. She found the still point. The space between heartbeats, squeezed. The sound was massive and immediate, and then gone. Absorbed by the mountain the way all sound is eventually absorbed. Completely, without ceremony, without acknowledgement from the physical world that something irreversible had just occurred. Then nothing, nothing to see, nothing to hear. Nothing to do but wait, because at 1,840 meters, the bullet takes 2.7 seconds. 2.7 seconds is not a long time in any ordinary context. On a ridge in southern Afghanistan, with 11 people behind her, and a mortar round at the breach of the tube, 7 seconds was an entire lifetime compressed into a space so small she could feel her own heartbeat trying to fill it. 1 scope on target, did not move. 2, did not blink. 2.7, the commander dropped. Not falling, not stumbling, dropped. The instantaneous, absolute collapse of a body in which something essential has stopped. Clean. Final, without drama, the way physics ends things when it has decided. Completely. Without appeal. The soldier at the tube stood up, stared at the commander on the ground, stared at the ridge, toward a position he could not see, at a distance he could not have believed. In the direction of a sound the mountain had already absorbed, then ran. The third fighter was already moving before the second one had made a decision. Smart soldiers moved before they understood. Less experienced ones waited to understand before they moved. The net came alive. Okafor. Target down. Both secondary fighters moving south. Running. Leaving the tube, Vega, on an open channel. Oh my God, did everyone, Hollis? Vega. Off the net, Vega. But did you, Hollis? Off the net, Vega. Yes, sorry. Yes. Nora kept her eye on the scope. She tracked both fighters until they were out of effective range and still moving. Swept the valley. south, southwest, west, the far ridge, the eastern tree line clear. She pulled back from the scope, sat with the silence for exactly 1 moment. Not performing anything, not managing anything. Just sitting with it. Her hands were steady. She checked. Her breathing was steady. She checked that too, by measurement, not by feeling. In the moment, feel was not reliable. Measurement was. Her heart rate was elevated, but coming down. The way a calculation settles when the proof is complete and the work is done. Tontran Anthor Oak 4 appeared beside her. He had moved from his position to hers in the time it took her to complete the sweep. Fast. He had been ready to move the moment the shot went. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither spoke. 40 meters. 1,840 meters. She confirmed. He was quiet. Then Raymond Okafor, who did not say things he did not mean, who had 21 years of evidence that most things did not merit more than a nod and a copy, who expressed belief through the practical, invisible work of removing obstacles and never through words, said the thing she would carry for the rest of her life. Not because it was eloquent, because it was Okafor, and Okafor only spoke when the words were necessary. I've been in this army for 21 years, he said. She waited. I have never seen that. Pause. In my life, I have never seen that. She nodded once. They looked out at the valley together, the mortar tube abandoned on the valley floor, the base plate tilt thrust into the dirt, the round that was never fired lying nearby. On the command net, Weston transmitting to higher. Voice-controlled, professional, mortar position neutralized, primary target down, secondary personnel in flight, no friendly casualties, all elements intact. She listened to him describe what had happened. He did not say her name. She noticed. She remembered it. The patrol extracted 37 minutes later. 12 soldiers moved off the ridge, the same way they had come up, together, in formation, with everything they had brought. But different, the particular weight of anticipated threat had lifted. What replaced it was the specific interior experience of people who have just survived something that could have gone another way and are quietly recalibrating around that fact. 12 people who had come back because the preparation existed before the moment required it. Vega fell into step behind Nora on the descent. Quiet for 20 minutes. Then, thank you. Do your job every day, she said. That's how you thank me. How are you feeling right now? She thought about it honestly. Like the math worked. Is that enough? Today it is. They kept walking. The descent was an exercise in the specific discipline of re-entering ordinary time. On the ridge, everything had been compressed. Every second had weight and dimension and consequence. The calculation had been everything. The moment had been everything. And now the moment was past and the calculation was complete and the proof was in, and they were walking back down a hill in the ordinary morning of October 23rd, 2009, in Afghanistan, and the world was simply continuing. The world had not paused for what had just happened. It was always the thing that surprised her, every time. Not the events themselves. She prepared for events, she could carry them, but the world's indifference to them. The sun was continuing its arc. The wind was continuing its drift. Somewhere below, on the valley floor, 2 men were running south as fast as they could move, and the valley was simply containing them the same way it would contain anything, without preference or judgment. 12 soldiers were walking back down a ridge. That was what had changed. That was what the math had done. Not 12 different soldiers, these 12 specifically on this morning, because the calculation had been correct, and the preparation had existed before the moment. Required it, and someone had been ready when nobody asked her to be. She would think about this later. Not on the descent. The descent she was still tracking and reading and watching the terrain the way she always watched the terrain. But later in the equipment bay, in the quiet after Weston had come and gone. Later she would sit with the full weight of it, for now she walked. Hiohali, this bottom of the descent, 1,840 meters. Yes, past the published effective range. Yes, he was quiet a few steps. The manual doesn't account for the person holding the rifle. Not a question. An observation delivered to the middle distance. No, she said. It doesn't. He nodded once, fell back. That was all. But it was enough. Back at base, equipment bay, rifle broken down. 4 minutes in, Weston came in, same calibrated distance as always, the shot you made today, at 1,840 meters. That was the right call. A pause. Exceptional marksmanship, Sergeant. Thank you, sir. He turned to leave. Sir, he stopped. The intelligence assessment from October 14th was accurate. I'm not saying that to be right. I'm saying it. So the next time a pattern like that comes in from anyone in this unit, it gets examined before the ridge. Not from it. A long silence. Then he turned fully and looked at her, not the inventory look. The direct, unmediated look of one person actually seeing another for the first time. Or the first time he was willing to admit, noted, he said, and walked out. Weston stood in the doorway for a moment, after she said noted, long enough that she noticed he had stopped, long enough that she understood he was working through something, and had decided not to speak it yet. She did not help him. She had spent 3 weeks watching him call her a function, and had spent 9 evenings preparing for a moment the system had decided wasn't coming. The least she could offer him right now was the experience of standing in the doorway with whatever he was carrying without being rescued from it. He left. She sat with that too, not with satisfaction, not with the feeling of a score being settled, just with the plain fact of a person who had encountered something that exceeded what he had been prepared for, and had not yet figured out what that meant. She did not know what he would do with it. She had said what she had said. The rest was his. She sat in the quiet equipment bay and let the day settle. 12 soldiers on an exposed ridge. Around at the breach, 2.7 seconds. 12 soldiers walking back through that perimeter. For the first time in 9 days, she felt something that was not calculation. Relief plain, human, uncomplicated. The kind that only comes when something you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down. She sat with it until it faded into the ordinary sounds of the evening. Then she put the rifle back together and went to find something to eat. She was very hungry. She hadn't noticed until now. The report was 11 pages long. Weston had been in the operations room for 2 hours writing it. Sergeant First Class Webb had tried to contribute the secondary element observations. Weston told him he had it covered. Webb left. Weston kept writing. The report was submitted at 0545 the following morning. 11 pages, single-spaced, organized, precise. Professionally formatted in exactly the style brigade expected from an officer of his rank and experience. In those 11 pages, the phrase "the designated marksman" appeared 14 times. The name Nora Callahan did not appear once. Not in the engagement narrative. Not in the intelligence pre-assessment section. Not in the tactical decision timeline. Not in the outcome summary. Not in the recommendations. 14 times. A function, a role, a replaceable piece of military equipment that happened to breathe and calculate and fire and save 12 lives. 14 times. And not once, not a single time in 11 pages, describing the most significant engagement their unit had produced. In this deployment, did anyone reading that document learn that the person who had done it had a name? Major Clara Demi received the report at 0600. She was 38 years old, 16 years in the Army, the first 8 in field operations, the last 8 in positions that required her to read documents, the way surgeons read films, not just for what was visible, but for what the absence of a visible thing indicated. What was missing was often informative as what was present. She read Weston's report once, straight through. To get the shape of it, then she reached for the radio transcript log. Every transmission on every patrol channel was automatically time-stamped and archived. Standard procedure. Administrative background noise that nobody thought about until they did. She pulled up October 23rd.0641. She found it immediately, because she knew what she was looking for. Sergeant Callahan. Take the shot, 4 words. Weston's voice. Logged at 064132. The timestamp as precise and indifferent as physics. She set the transcript beside the report, looked at both. The report, the designated marksman engaged the primary target at a distance of 1,840 meters. The transcript, Sergeant Callahan. Take the shot. He knew her name. He had said her name, out loud. On a recorded channel, at the exact moment when 12 lives depended on whether she could make that shot. In that moment, the designation was not enough. He needed her, specifically her, by name, and so he had said it. And then he had written 11 pages in which that name did not appear, not once. Not through carelessness, not through bureaucratic kind of administrative inattention that produces errors in documents. Through choice, a GME picked up her phone. Lieutenant Weston. My office. Now. She didn't say please. She didn't need to. Weston appeared in her doorway 4 minutes later. Uniform correct. Clipboard absent. He had calculated, apparently, that the clipboard would read as defensive, and had arrived without it. Smart. It didn't help him. Adeyemi said nothing when he entered, just pointed at the chair across from her desk. He sat. She placed 2 documents in front of him, the report, the transcript. Then she waited. Weston looked at both. His face did what faces do when they encounter something they had hoped would not exist. A very brief, controlled rearrangement, and then the neutral, professional expression, settling back into place. Because he was good at neutral and professional. It was the most reliable tool available to him. Ma'am, he started. What is this soldier's name? He stopped. The soldier who fired the shot at 1,840 meters on October 23rd. What is her name? Staff Sergeant Callahan. Ma'am. And this, she touched the transcript. 1 finger on the timestamp. Is that your voice? So you know her name? Yes, ma'am. Then, I want you to explain to me why her name does not appear in 11 pages describing what she did. Silence. The kind that has something underneath it. Weston opened his mouth. Closed it. Adeyemi watched him cycle through the available architectures of explanation. The professional designation defense, the standard practice defense, the oversight defense, and watched each one get discarded before it reached his lips. Because none of them were true. And he knew she knew, ma'am, he said finally. I don't have. I know you don't. She picked up both documents. You are going to rewrite this. Every section where her actions are described, her name goes where her actions are. She held his gaze without blinking. That is not a request, Lieutenant. It is the correction of factual accuracy in an official military document. You have, until 1400, he nodded. Dismissed, he stood. Moved toward the door. Lieutenant. He stopped. You said her name when it mattered most, she said. In the field. At a 641, when 12 soldiers were alive or not. Depending on whether she could make that shot, you said her name. Because in that moment the designation was not enough. You needed the actual person. She let that sit for a moment. Make sure the record says it too. He left. Adeyemi sat alone for a moment. Then she opened a new document and began drafting a separate notification to battalion. Darren Hollis found Nora at the range at 0630. He appeared at the barrier, with his characteristic economy of motion. No preamble. You need to hear this before someone else tells you, he said. I think you have the right to hear it first. She lowered the rifle. Waited. He told her what he had heard through the door of Adeyemi's office. The transcript. The question. The 14 omissions. The rewrite order. All of it cleanly. Without editorializing. Because with Hollis the facts were the point, and anything he personally felt about the facts was secondary, and none of her business unless she asked. When he finished, Nora was very still. 14, she said. 14. She looked at the range target in front of her, the paper silhouette at 100 meters she had been working on for the past 20 minutes. It was 7, she said. In the previous reports, he averaged 7 per document. She picked up the rifle, checked the chamber. When what I did became impossible to explain away, he needed twice as many omissions. That's one way to read it. It's the accurate way. She fired. Hit. Center mass. Thank you, she said. For telling me first. You deserve to know, he said. Then, because he was Hollis, he left. Nora stood at the firing line and shot for another 30 minutes. Not to manage the anger, not to redirect it into something more presentable, because this was where she put things that were true and difficult. Into the math, into the still point between heartbeats. Into proof that the calculation worked, regardless of what anyone wrote in any document. The rifle didn't ask her name. It just asked her to be ready. She was always ready. Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Shaw was 53 years old and had been in the Army for 31 years. He had commanded at every level from platoon to battalion. He had read more after-action reports than he could count and had developed over those 31 years a specific ability to read a document the way Nora read terrain. Not just for what was present, but for what it was working around. The shape of an absence was as informative as the shape of what was there. He received Weston's original report at 0900. He received Adedeyemi's notification at 0920. He read the original first, all 11 pages. Then the amended version alongside it. Then the radio transcript. He set everything down and sat for a moment. His aide appeared in the doorway. "Get me Lieutenant Weston, Sergeant First Class Okafor." And he checked the roster. He wanted to say it correctly. He wanted to make sure that when he said it, he was saying the actual name of the actual person. Staff Sergeant Nora Callahan, my office. 1100, yes, sir. Shaw looked back down at the amended report. Her name was in it now. Every section, every action, every decision attributed correctly. Staff Sergeant Nora Callahan, designated marksman, acquired and engaged the primary target at a confirmed distance of 1,840 meters, successfully neutralizing the mortar positioner, commander, and forcing the withdrawal of remaining enemy personnel, preventing the mortar team from achieving a firing solution on the exposed patrol element. He read it a second time then, the third 31 years. He had seen things he could explain and things he couldn't, things that fell into the category of technically possible, but practically requiring something beyond ordinary competence to execute. At a category that was smaller than most people believed and larger than most mules acknowledged. This was category. Force. He picked up his phone and called the brigade commander. 1100. Shaw's office, 3 chairs on one side of the desk. Weston on the left. Okafor in the center. Nora on the right. Shaw started with Okafor. Asked him to walk through the patrol timeline. Okafor did it chronologically, without editorializing, with the specific authority of a man who knows that facts presented do more work than any amount of framing. Shaw asked Weston for his decision timeline. When he called higher, what guidance he received. When he gave the order to engage, Weston answered everything directly. He did not soften anything. He did not reframe. Whatever had happened in the hours between Adeyemi's office and this chair, whatever work he had done, privately with the truth of what he had done, it had resolved itself into something that resembled honesty. Then Shaw looked at Nora, Sergeant Callahan. Walk me through the math. So she did, 9 days of it. Starting on October 14th, the movement signatures, the specific character of the intervals, what differentiated pre-positioning from general patrol movement, and why that distinction mattered. The wind data collected every morning for 6 days at that elevation. The drop calculation, the drift compensations, the time of flight, the 9 evening sessions at the range. The progression from 900 to 1,840 meters. The adjustments made each day from logged results. The difference between what the manual said was possible and what the physics said was possible. The ridge, the scope, the 3 personnel, the still point. Shaw listened without interrupting. When she finished, he he was quiet. The M120's published effective range is 800 meters, he said. You engaged at 1,840. Yes, sir. Army marksmanship doctrine does not address engagements beyond 200 meters for that weapons system. No, sir, it doesn't. So there is no manual that accounts for what you did. She met his eyes. The physics accounts for it, sir. The manual just hasn't caught up. Something shifted in his expression. The small, clear shift of a man who has understood something precisely and is adjusting around that understanding. I'm recommending a Bronze Star with Valor, he said. Paperwork to brigade by end of week. Thank you, sir. The amended report stands as the permanent record. Your name, your rank, your actions. He held her gaze. That is not a courtesy, Sergeant Callahan. It is the correction of an error. It should have been right the first time. Yes, sir. It should have. Beside her. Okafor shifted in his seat, in the way that meant he was working extremely hard to maintain a neutral expression. Shaw closed his folder, looked at all three of them. The intelligence assessment filed October 14th. He looked at Nora. You were right. 9 days before anyone else in this chain had the same read. He looked at Weston. I want to understand how that assessment was handled at the patrol level, and I want to ensure that future assessments from this unit are processed in a way that does not lose that kind of signal. He held Weston's gaze a beat longer than necessary. Understood, sir, Weston said. Good. Dismissed. In the hallway, Okafor waited until the door had fully closed. Your name in the permanent record. My name in the permanent record. She confirmed. How does that feel? She thought about it honestly, like it should have been there from the beginning. Okafor nodded slowly. Yeah, it should have. They walked out into the afternoon. Neither said anything more. Because there wasn't anything more that needed to be said. Equipment Bay, 1330. Nora was reassembling a component she had broken down for cleaning. Her hands moved through the steps with the automatic precision of 10,000 repetitions. The body knew the sequence before the mind had finished thinking it. She heard him come in. Didn't look up. Weston walked in. Stood a few feet away. The same calibrated distance as always, close enough for privacy, far enough from anything personal. That distance had been consistent across every conversation they had ever had in this room. She had noticed. She had filed it. Now she sat with it. She set the component down. Gave him her full attention. Not to make it easier for him. Because she had decided she was going to hear whatever he said, with the same precision she applied to everything else. And she was going to let it be what it was, without smoothing the edges for anyone's comfort. Sergeant Callahan. He said. Lieutenant Weston. He looked at her. She looked back. The report, he said. Major Adeyemi amended it. I heard. I want you to understand. He stopped. Start it again. The way I referenced your role in the original draft. The designation instead of your name. Another stop. He seemed to be moving carefully, like someone who has decided to say the true thing, but is still working out how much of it he can carry. I've been trying to construct a good explanation for the past 18 hours. She waited. I don't have one, he said. She said nothing. What I have instead is the truth. He looked at the floor briefly, then back at her, the direct look, not the inventory, the one that meant he was actually looking. I read your assessment on October 14th. Within 2 days, I understood the pattern you were identifying. I understood you were probably right. He paused. But acknowledging that meant acknowledging I had looked at the same information and classified it incorrectly. And I was 24 years old, and this was my first command, and I didn't know how to be wrong in a way that didn't feel like. He stopped. Like falling, she said. He blinked. Yes. Like in front of people who were already watching to see if you'd fall. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he had to decide whether to hold her gaze or look away. He held it. You want to know what the worst part is? She said. He waited. It's not that you didn't trust the assessment. Her voice was level, informational. the tone she used for wind calculations. I've operated without that trust. I've learned how. That part, I've had practice. She held his gaze. The worst part is that you knew. You read it. You understood it. You understood I was right. And you still chose not to act on it. She paused. That's not a failure of analysis, Lieutenant. That's a choice. And 12 people on that ridge were the ones who carried the cost of that choice. While Hire was reviewing and the tube was loading, he didn't say anything. Because it was true. Don't do it again, she said. Not to me. Not to anyone in this unit. Not to anyone you command after this, he nodded. Yes, Sergeant, he said. And for the first time in their entire professional relationship, the rank felt like it belonged to her. Not assigned to a designation. Not delegated to a function. Hers. The actual weight of what she had earned, landing in the correct place. He left. She picked up the component, finished assembling the rifle. Clean. Complete. Nothing left to assumption. 3 weeks passed. The deployment found its rhythm again. Patrols, briefings, intelligence analysis. The slow accumulation of ordinary days. She noticed that Weston had changed. Not completely. People didn't work that way. But something in how he ran the unit had shifted. He used names now, consistently. He stopped interrupting before people were finished. He asked follow-up questions when assessments were presented, even ones that complicated his picture. She noticed without editorial. Filed it appropriately. One afternoon in early November, Okafor found her in the intelligence section. Vega is putting in for marksman cross-training, he said. I told him to ask you first. What did he say? He said he didn't want to impose on you. Okafor's expression stayed perfectly flat. He's 20 years old. He watches you like you hung the moon, and he's terrified of bothering you. She looked back at her data. Tell him I'll write the primary endorsement. And tell him he could have asked me himself. The corner of Okafor's mouth moved 2 millimeters. I'll pass that along, he said. He picked up his coffee and left. She stared at the data, then at the door. Thought about Vega, writing to his mother about her, before October 23rd, before the ridge and the shot and 14 omissions. Just a 20-year-old writing home about a sergeant who made him feel safer. Not because she'd done anything dramatic, because she was there, doing the math, every day. She thought about that longer than she usually thought about things that weren't calculations. Then she went back to work. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Weston found her in the equipment bay again. Not because Adeyemi had sent him. Not because Shaw had directed it. He came on his own, in the specific way of someone who has something to say, and has decided to say it before the window closes. There's something I want you to know, he said. She set down what she was working on. I requested an addendum to the Brigade Award recommendation, he said. Separate from the citation, describing the intelligence assessment on October 14th, the 9 days of independent analysis, the wind data, the methodology, he paused. I wanted the record to include not just the shot, but the work before it. The part that nobody would have seen, she hadn't known that. I also noted, he said, that the assessment was in my possession for 4 days before I acted on it, and why. He held her gaze. I thought the record should include that too. The complete picture. She stood with that for a moment. This man who had spent 3 weeks calling her a function, who had written 14 omissions into 11 pages, who had sat alone at 0200 with a correct assessment and turned off the lamp because the truth cost more than he knew how. Doing the slow, imperfect work of becoming someone who understood what he had done. Not just the report, not just the designation, the choice. Putting his own name on the choice in the permanent record, people didn't transform. She knew that you didn't have one hard conversation and emerge remade. But sometimes people changed direction, and sometimes that was enough to matter. Thank you, Lieutenant Weston. She said. She walked away, didn't look back. November 18th, 0840. The Bronze Star arrived in a manila envelope, the ways most things arrived at a forward operating base. without ceremony, processed through the administrative section, signed for by the duty clerk, placed in a stack with everything else. Okafor found her in the intelligence section 40 minutes into the morning's data review. Sat down across from her. It came through. He said she looked up. Bronze Star with Valor. Approved at division. Formal presentation at battalion commander's discretion. He paused. Shaw wants a full formation. He told the adjutant he wanted it done right. She looked at him for a moment. Then back at the intelligence package. Okay, she said. Okafor watched her. That's it? What else should it be? He was quiet then. Something. She set down her pen. Thought about it honestly. It matters, she said, more than I'm making it look. But the thing it's recognizing happened 26 days ago. I've been doing the job every day since. The job doesn't pause because the paperwork caught up. She looked at him. It matters, Raymond. I just don't know what to do with it yet. He was quiet for a moment. Call your mother, he said. Before Friday. She opened her mouth. I know you, he said. You'll get through the ceremony and come back stateside, and she'll find out her daughter received the Bronze Star with Valor in Afghanistan. 3 months after the fact. In passing conversation, he crossed his arms. Call her tonight. She closed her mouth. Tonight, he said again. He walked out. That evening at 19:30, she picked up the phone. It rang 4 times. Then her mother's voice, clear, immediate, alert, someone who has learned to be ready at any hour without admitting to themselves that they've been waiting. Nora, hey Mom. A pause. Not the worried kind. Diana Callahan had calibrated these pauses across years. She knew the difference between the pause that meant something was wrong and the pause that meant her daughter was choosing how to begin. You sound okay, she said. I am okay. Are you sleeping? Some. That means no. Nora looked at the wall in front of her. She had been rehearsing a clean, organized account. Chronological, properly framed. The kind of briefing her mother would recognize and appreciate. But holding the phone, hearing her mother's voice, the rehearsed version felt wrong. Too neat. Too much like a report and not enough like a daughter, calling the person who had sat across a kitchen table in Colleen and told her the truth when the truth was hard. So she said it plainly. I made a shot, she said. 26 days ago, 1,840 meters. There was a mortar team in the valley, below our patrol position. I took out the commander. The team scattered. Nobody on our patrol was hurt. Silence. 1,840 meters, her mother said. Yes. Another silence. Longer, Nora. Her mother's voice had changed. Not broken. Diana Callahan did not break on phone calls to a forward operating base, but something had shifted in it. The way things shift when something held very carefully for a very long time is finally allowed to rest. That's over a mile. 1.44 miles. You're telling me this now because something happened with the recognition. Bronze Star with Valor. Came through today. Formal presentation Friday. The silence that followed was the longest one. When her mother spoke again, her voice was the voice Nora Huffer had heard exactly twice in her life. Once when her grandmother died. Once when Nora had called from her first deployment to say she was safe after a patrol that had not been safe. The voice of a woman who has arrived somewhere underneath everything she has been holding. I'm proud of you, her mother said. I have always been proud of you. But what I'm feeling right now doesn't have a name that fits inside a phone call. Nora felt something shift in her own chest. Something that had been held in a specific position for 26 days. Carefully, without complaint. Because there had been no time and no space, and no person she had allowed herself to open it with. I know, she is. Me too. A beat. Your father is going to cry. Don't tell him until I'm home. I'm calling him the moment we hang up. Mom, he has been worried about you every single day since you shipped out. If you think I'm going to sit on this, okay, Nora said, and then, unexpectedly, completely, in the specific way of things that catch you off guard because you needed them and didn't know it, she laughed. Small. Sudden. Her mother laughed, too. And for just a moment, across 8, 0 miles of satellite signal and static, and the enormous indifferent distance between an installation in Afghanistan and a kitchen in Killeen, Texas. They were just two people who loved each other, laughing about Thomas, Callahan crying in the kitchen because his daughter had done the impossible and survived it. "Come home, safe," her mother said. "I will. I love you. I love you too." The call ended. Nora sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she set it down and sat in the quiet and let herself feel the full, uncomplicated weight of being known by someone. Not recognized, not awarded, not documented. Known, it was the best she had felt since October 23rd. Friday, November 20th, 1,000.231 soldiers. Formation between the operations center and the vehicle staging area. Bodies at correct intervals. Faces forward. The collective quiet of people who understand what this kind of moment is for. Shaw at the front. The adjutant beside him. The battalion colors behind them. Weston in formation with his platoon. He had looked at Nora that morning and nodded. She had nodded back. Sufficient Okafor, one position to her left. He had been there when she arrived and would be there when it was done. That was simply what Okafor did, present for the things that mattered, without announcement. Vega, 3 rows back. 20 minutes before formation, he had appeared beside her and said, with the careful seriousness of a 20-year-old trying to sound older, "I want you to know this is one of the things I will remember for the rest of my life." She had said, "Stay in your lane, Vega." He had grinned, found his place. Shaw read the citation. She had read it herself the previous afternoon. Once, quietly, folded it and put it in her notebook. But hearing it read aloud, in Shaw's voice, in front of 231 soldiers, that was different because the words missing for 26 days from Weston's original report were all there. Her name, her rank, her actions, her calculation, her shot, the distance, the result. 12 soldiers. Staff Sergeant Nora Callahan said clearly, formally, permanently. In front of everyone, she stood at attention and did not allow herself to look anywhere but forward. Because if she looked anywhere else, she was going to feel more than she was prepared to feel in front of 231 people. When Shaw pinned the medal, he said quietly, "The Army is better for having you in it." Sergeant Callahan. "I'm sorry it took this long for the record to say so." "Thank you, sir." He saluted her. She returned it afterward. 3 things first, Vega. In front of her, nothing coming out. He just stood there with an expression that said everything his vocabulary couldn't. Then he put out his hand. She shook it. That was all. That was enough. Second, Okafor walking beside her. "Your father is going to frame that citation. I know. He's going to tell everyone. Raymond, I'm just—" "I know," she said. He was quiet for 3 steps. "Good," he said third. Weston at the edge of the dispersal. Not blocking, just present. The addendum was approved. Entered into the brigade record, I know. Okafor told me. He held her gaze. "I know it doesn't fix the original, no, but both are in the record now. Someone who reads it later will see both." She walked away. Didn't look back. December 11th, 0300. They flew out of Kandahar on a C-17. The way most departures from Afghanistan happened, in the dark, without ceremony, with everything that had occurred between arrival and leaving packed into the same rucksacks and duffel bags they had brought in. No fanfare, no marking of the threshold, just the wheels leaving the ground and the sound of the engines becoming the only sound, and the gradual understanding that the thing was done. Nora sat near the rear of the aircraft, Okafor across the aisle, Vega somewhere near the front, already asleep before the wheels left the ground, which was a talent she had always quietly envied. She didn't sleep. She sat with the noise of the engines and let herself think, for the first time in months, without the structure of a specific operational problem to solve about what came next. Not the orders. She had orders. She knew how to move through the mechanics of ending a deployment. She meant the other thing. The person who existed inside the rank, inside the role, inside the designation that was not her name. She thought about Keeleen, her parents' house, the way her father would stand in the doorway when she arrived and not say anything for a moment, just look at her. The way he looked at things he was relieved to see still in one piece. She thought about 1,840 meters, 2.7 seconds. 12 soldiers walking back through a perimeter. She thought about 14 omissions and one correction. She thought about her name being read aloud in front of 231 people on a Friday morning in November. She thought about her mother's voice. What I'm feeling right now doesn't have a name that fits inside a phone call. At some point over the Atlantic, Okafor woke up, saw that she was awake, didn't say anything, just nodded, the nod that meant, I see you. That's enough. She nodded back. They flew through the dark. She came home on a Thursday in December, cold and clear. Texas winter light, the kind that looks like late afternoon even at mid-morning. The kind that makes the familiar landscape look slightly more deliberate than it actually is. Her father's truck was in the airport lot. Her parents at the gate. Her father had talked his way past security, which was something Thomas Callahan did, and Diana Callahan pretended to disapprove of while quietly allowing, because it was the kind of thing that made her love him. Her mother hugged her first. Long. Complete. The hug of someone who has been careful for a long time and is in a place now where they don't have to be. Her father waited. When her mother stepped back, he stood in front of her and did what he always did. Took his inventory, checked for damage. The quiet assessment of a man who has been worried for a long time and is standing in front of the evidence that he can stop. Then he put his arms around her and held on. He didn't say anything. She felt him exhale. One long, slow exhale that had something in it. She recognized the release of months of carefully managed worry, finally allowed to leave. She held on too. When he stepped back, his eyes were wet. He didn't apologize for it. Thomas Callahan did not apologize for things that were true. There's something at the house, he said. You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. Tronker, the shadow box, was on the kitchen table. He had built it himself. Carefully, with wood chosen specifically, joints fitted with the precision of someone who builds things to outlast the moment and the person and everything else. That was how Thomas Callahan built things. Not for now, for after. Inside, 3 things. The bronze star. The actual medal, which had arrived home before she did. The brass casing from October 23rd. She had kept it wrapped in cloth in the bottom of her duffel bag since the patrol. Not entirely certain why, only knowing she needed to. Her father had not asked where it came from. He had simply put it where it belonged, and 2 pieces of paper placed side by side. The first, a copy of Weston's original report. The one with 14 omissions. The one in which she appeared 14 times as a function and not once as a person. The second, a Dayami's amended version. With every place Nora's name appeared highlighted in yellow, not just the amended sections. Every single place. Because when you correct something correctly, you correct it completely. She stood at the kitchen table and looked at both pieces of paper for a long time, at the spaces in the original where her name should have been. At the yellow in the amended version, every place she was, every place she had always been, every place the correction had put back. Why both? She said. Why keep the original? Her father stood beside her. Because the original happened, he said. It was real. Someone chose to do that. He was quiet for a moment. And the correction was also real. Someone chose to do that too. He looked at the yellow. You need to remember both. What people do when they think they can get away with it. And what people do when they decide they can't live with what they did. She looked at the 2 pieces of paper. At the omissions. At the corrections. At the name that had been erased and then restored. It's perfect, Dad, she said. I know, he said. She put her arm around him and he put his arm around her. And they stood at the kitchen table in Killeen, Texas, and looked at the shadow box together, while a mother behind them made coffee and pretended not to be watching. 2 years later, 2011. A Tuesday evening, Nora was at her kitchen table when the phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Is this Staff Sergeant Nora Callahan?" Young, female, deliberate in the way of someone who has rehearsed this and is trying not to let the rehearsal show. "Who's asking? My name is Priya Osei, PFC, Fort Campbell. I'm in the designated marksman training program." A pause. "I found the corrected report, the one from October 2009. Someone posted it online." Another pause. Longer. "I read it 3 times. Nora was quiet for a moment. "How'd you get this number?" "Sergeant First Class Okafor." Of course, he did. She made a mental note to say something to Okafor about this. She also made a mental note that she would absolutely not say anything to Okafor about this, because he had been right to do it and she was not going to punish people for being right, he said. Priya's voice was careful now. He said, "If I was serious enough to track him down, I was serious enough to call. What do you want to know?" Nora said, "Everything." The word came out unguarded. Completely. The specific directness of someone who means it with their whole self and has intent to make it sound more reasonable. Nora sat at her kitchen table. She looked at the shadow box on the shelf across the room, the bronze star, the brass casing, the 2 pieces of paper side by side, original and corrected, the yellow. She thought about a briefing room at Fort Bragg in August 2009. A lieutenant with a clipboard and 5 words. 9 days of mathematics. Nobody wanted to believe. 2.7 seconds and 1,840 meters, and 12 soldiers walking back through a perimeter. She thought about 14 omissions and 1 correction. She thought about what it costs to prove something. She thought about what it means to be erased, and what it means to be put back. And she thought about what Okafor had said to her in a hallway a long time ago, before any of it had happened, when the only thing she had was the math and the certainty that it was right. Be ready, whatever they call it up the chain. Be ready. She pulled a notepad toward her. "Okay," she said. "Start with the math." The math? Every shot starts with the math. The shot doesn't happen without the math. Most people want to start with the trigger. That's why most people aren't ready when it counts. A pause on the other end. Then steadier. "Okay, tell me the math. What's your current zero distance?" 800 meters. "And what conditions are you practicing in?" "Range conditions." "Controlled? Wind?" "I've been using whatever the range reports." "Stop doing that," Nora wrote a note. "Track it yourself, every morning before you shoot. The range report is a starting point. Your log is the data, and your log is what matters when it counts." "Okay, what's your drop compensation at 800? "I've been using the scope adjustments. The scope adjustments are someone else's math. You need your own. Theirs accounts for the average. You are not the average," she wrote something. "Tell me your barrel length. Tell me your round weight. Tell me your elevation." Priya answered each question. Nora listened. Wrote. Asked the next one. "How long have you been practicing past your current zero?" Nora asked. "I haven't. They rejected my first application for the advanced program. They said my long-range accuracy isn't there yet." "What did your data say?" A pause. "I haven't been logging it systematically. That's where we start. Not with the rejection. With the data." Nora paused. "What's the second application deadline?" 6 weeks. 6 weeks is enough, but you have to log everything. Every shot. Every condition. Every variable you can measure. You measure. Every variable you can't measure directly, you track until you can estimate it reliably." She paused. "The manual says 800 meters is the limit. The physics don't say that. The physics say it depends on the calculation. And the calculation depends on the data. And the data comes from the work. And if my calculation is good enough, then the distance is just a number." A longer pause. Then, "How did you know? Before October 23rd, before the ridge. How did you know the math was right when nobody believed you?" Nora looked at the shadow box on the shelf, the 2 pieces of paper, the original and the corrected, the omissions and the yellow, both real, both in the record, both permanent. I didn't know until it proved itself, she said. Nobody ever does. That's why you do the work before the moment, so that when the moment arrives, knowing or not knowing, isn't the question anymore. The preparation is the answer. And if they still don't believe you, even after? Nora thought about a briefing room in August, a lieutenant with a clipboard, 5 words, the room going quiet. She thought about the space between the exhale and the next inhale, and 2.7 seconds, and 12 soldiers walking back through a perimeter. Then the work is still done, she said, and the date stamp on correct preparation is permanent regardless of who acknowledged it. The record exists or it doesn't. The data exists or it doesn't. You make it exist. She paused. Now tell me your barrel twist rate. Priya told her. Nora wrote it down and started teaching. That was the real end of the story. Not the medal. Not the corrected report. Not the shadow box on the shelf in Killeen with the bronze and the brass casing and the 2 pieces of paper side by side, the one with the emissions and the one with the yellow. The real end was a woman at a kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in 2011, passing the math forward, because the shot that couldn't be done had been done, and the name that had been erased had been restored. And now there was a young soldier on the other end of a phone line who needed to understand that the manual was not the limit, that the math was the limit, and that the math was something you could learn. If you were willing to do the work and log the data and be ready before anyone believed you needed to be. Nora Callahan was willing. She had always been willing. Because someone had stood behind her on a range in Killeen when she was 12 years old and said one word, Agan, and she had. And now she was the one saying it. That was who she was. That had always been who she was.